Everyone in the lecture hall went silent the moment Professor Harris walked in. He was the kind of teacher everyone feared, brilliant but ruthless. Famous for his impossible math problems and for humiliating anyone who dared to think they were smart enough to solve them. Today, his eyes scanned the room until they landed on a woman sitting quietly in the back row. She wasn't a student. She didn't belong here at all. Her name was Emma, a simple woman who had come with her friend just to watch. But when the professor's gaze locked on her, she knew something was about to happen. Professor Harris smirked and called her forward, ignoring the puzzled whispers from the students. He scribbled a massive equation across the board, numbers, symbols, and strange signs that made no sense to most people in the room. He turned to Emma and told her, in front of everyone, that if she could solve this impossible problem, he'd admit that maybe ordinary people had more to offer than his so-called elite students. The students laughed. Phones came out to record. Emma looked at the whiteboard, her hands trembling slightly. She'd never stood in front of a crowd like this before. But what no one knew was that Emma wasn't as ordinary as she seemed. She stepped closer to the board, her eyes narrowing as she took in every line and curve of the problem. The professor crossed his arms, confident she'd give up or embarrass herself trying. The room buzzed with low murmurs, students waiting for the moment they could laugh at her failure. Emma picked up the marker. She looked at the numbers again, took a breath, and then, to everyone's shock, her hands started moving across the board fast. Lines, numbers, solutions, dot, and just when they thought she was about to stop, Emma's marker kept gliding over the whiteboard, each stroke faster than the last. The students leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, whispering to each other in disbelief. Even Professor Harris shifted uncomfortably, his smirk fading just a little. He had built his entire reputation on problems no student could solve, certainly not some random woman who didn't even belong in his classroom. But here she was, turning his impossible problem into something that almost looked simple. A few students pulled out their notebooks, trying to follow along, but Emma's mind seemed to work on a level none of them could match. Some began to wonder who she really was. Why was she here? How could she know so much when she didn't look like a genius or a mathematician? Emma, meanwhile, didn't hear any of it. Her focus was locked on the numbers and patterns only she seemed to see. She thought back to where it all began. Back home, Emma was just the woman who fixed things. Broken clocks, tangled computer code, puzzle books she borrowed from the library. Anything that needed solving, she did it quietly, away from crowds. No one had ever cared. No one had ever noticed. Until now. Professor Harris watched her hand moving and felt something stir inside him, an uneasy feeling he hadn't felt in years. Could he have made a mistake? Had he underestimated her? He glanced at the clock on the wall, silently hoping she'd slip up soon and prove his point. But Emma just kept writing. The classroom door creaked open, and another teacher peeked in, drawn by the hushed chaos. Phones were still recording, eyes flicking from the board to the professor's face and back again. And just when it seemed Emma was about to finish, she stopped, marker hovering in the air, eyes narrowing at the final line of the puzzle. Emma's hand froze inches from the whiteboard, the tip of the marker trembling. A hush fell over the room, thicker than before. She could feel every eye on her back, Professor Harris glaring like he wanted her to fail. The students leaning in as if they were watching the final seconds of a championship game. She glanced at the last line of the equation. Something didn't add up. The numbers twisted in her mind, reshaping themselves into patterns only she could see behind her. A soft voice broke the silence. It was Olivia, Emma's friend, the only reason she'd come to this university today. Olivia had begged her to sit in on this famous class, never guessing it would turn into a spectacle. Olivia's eyes pleaded with her to step back, to just Stop before she embarrassed herself or made the professor angrier. But Emma barely heard her. The problem was calling to her, like a half-open door she had to step through. Meanwhile, Professor Harris's mind raced. He couldn't let her solve it. His reputation, his authority over these students, everything rested on being untouchable, on proving no ordinary mind could challenge him. He glanced at a tall student near the front, David, his star pupil. David caught the look and understood. He started whispering to the others, feeding them doubts about Emma. Maybe she'd memorized. The answer? Maybe it was fake. Maybe she was cheating. A few students began murmuring, doubts spreading like smoke. Phones kept recording, catching every angle of Emma's hesitation. She felt it whispers, suspicion, the shifting weight of the room pressing down on her shoulders. But deeper inside her mind, she felt something else too. A memory of late nights alone with old books, scribbling solutions on napkins, never telling anyone. She tightened her grip on the marker, eyes locked on that last stubborn piece of the puzzle. She knew if she finished this, she'd expose something bigger than a math problem. She'd challenge the elite. And she wasn't sure they'd let her do that without a fight. Emma's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She could feel the sting of sweat on her palms, the cool marker suddenly heavy in her fingers. Behind her, the room felt smaller, tighter. Olivia mouthed something, "You don't have to do this," but Emma couldn't look away from the board. The last line of the problem seemed to taunt her, daring her to finish what she'd started. Professor Harris stepped closer, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor. He stood just behind her shoulder now, close enough that she could feel his breath. "Well?" he asked, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the whispers. "Is it too hard for you, miss? What was your name again?" The way he said it made the students giggle, but it also made a few glance at each other. Uneasy. David, the star student, spoke up louder this time. "She probably looked it up before class. There's no way she's doing this on her own. She's wasting our time." He sounded confident, but his eyes kept darting to the half-finished solution, as if he wished he understood it himself. Emma took a breath. She ignored them all. She traced the numbers in her head, remembering the tiny puzzles she used to solve in the dusty corner of the town library. This was the same thing, just bigger, just louder, just with more people ready to see her fail. Her mind pieced together the pattern. The solution flickered just out of reach, like a word on the tip of her tongue. Professor Harris leaned in closer. "Maybe you should step aside and let someone who belongs here finish it," he hissed. Just for her to hear. Emma's grip tightened. She knew that if she stopped now, they'd all believe he was right. People like her didn't belong here. But if she finished, she'd prove him wrong in front of every phone recording. Every student who'd ever doubted themselves. Her eyes narrowed at the final equation. She lifted the marker again. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment that would decide who was really the smartest person here, and whether Emma's quiet genius could break through walls that had stood for too long. Emma's marker touched the whiteboard again, the sound of it scratching out symbols echoing through the dead silence of the lecture hall. Every stroke drew her closer to the answer, closer to tearing down the invisible wall between the so-called elite and everyone like her ordinary. Unnoticed, underestimated. Professor Harris shifted behind her, his jaw tight, eyes darting from the board to the cameras that captured every second of his humiliation. But just as Emma was about to finish the final line, the classroom door burst open. A stern voice cut through the tension. "Stop, right there." The room turned to see a woman in a sharp gray suit stride in. Dean Walters, the head of the department. Her heels clicked like a judge's gavel on the tile floor. She scanned the board, then looked at Emma with a sharp, cold stare. "What's going on here, Harris?" Dean Walters demanded. Harris straightened his back quickly, trying to look in control. "She's trespassing," he said, voice slick. With fake calm, she's not enrolled. She doesn't belong here. This is a secure lesson, not a street show. Emma's hand froze again, the marker halfway through the last number. She looked at Olivia, who stared back, wide-eyed. Dean Walters stepped closer, her gaze like steel. "You're not a student, are you?" she asked Emma. Emma swallowed hard, shaking her head. A few students whispered louder now, some angry that their entertainment might end, some secretly rooting for Emma to finish what she'd started. David folded his arms, smirking now that the dean was here. She probably hacked the answer. "She doesn't deserve to stand there," he said, loud enough for the cameras to catch. Professor Harris nodded, jumping on David's words. "Exactly. She's a fraud. She can't solve it. She's wasting our time." Dean Walters turned to Emma, her tone sharp but curious. "If you write one more line, you'll face consequences for trespassing. Do you understand?" Her words hit the room like cold water. Emma felt her breath catch. She was one step from proving herself, but now one step from being thrown out. Maybe worse. The students held their phones higher, recording every second, hungry to see what Emma would do next. She looked back at the problem, at the marker in her hand, at the line she still hadn't finished. In that moment, she knew she'd have